All right, you ready? So here's what I would like to do. If you could draw a timeline on a blank sheet of paper, take a whole sheet of paper, and you could I'm going to do it long ways, but if you want to do it vertically, you could do it vertically. It wouldn't be a bad thing either. We're going to go all the way across the board. This is going to bug me. I want it even. Yeah, at the end of the AP test. And you're going to go 1945. And then you're going to go all the way up to 1970, which would mean this will be, so let's see, so it's 60, it would be 55 years, so it would be 27, 28 years, so 67. Oh no, it's 25 years. So this would be
57 and a half.
Let's go 1950. We'll make this 1953. How do I want to do this? Let's go. This will be 53. This will be 60. This will be 63. And 69. All right, that's close enough. It only took me 30 seconds to figure out how I want to do that timeline. All right, you ready for this? Do we want to shut the door? Do you mind? Thanks. Megan's got it. Chris got it. John's got it. Don't hurt each other. Okay. 1945. I should go in the hallway and scream at people and tell them they got to get out of the hallways. FDR dies abruptly in 1945. This is the same year that World War II ends. So World War II is winding down. It's the same year the atomic bombs are dropped. Germany is defeated. Hitler commits suicide. World War I's wrapping up. The Yalta Conference and the Potsdam Conference all happen in 1945. That is a very important year for you to remember. 1945, highly important year. Yeah?
So both Hitler and FDR come to power in the same year and die in the same year?
Yeah. FDR comes to power same year as Hitler, and they both die in the same year. Yep. No, not at all. I can tell you that. So FDR to Truman. And what we're going to focus on mostly today is the policies of each president. We'll talk about, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Take on top of the, where is it? There's see under my iPad case over there? There's answer sheets for you.
Is there another screen?
We're going to talk mostly about the presidential policies today. We'll also mention things that would be not associated with politics, but I'm not going to write them down. So what we'll do is we'll break this down into, I'm going to do it like this. We're going to break it down into foreign policy issues and domestic policy issues surrounding each president. Okay? So foreign policy, things that are going on, is number one, the atomic bomb, and bringing an end to World War II. The second thing that you must associate with Truman, and this is really important, is the idea of containment. And containment, you should associate with the Cold War. End of World War II also is the point where we're going to say that the Cold War is beginning. Start to Ken, right, which is a diplomat. He's the foreign diplomat, U.S. diplomat to Soviet Union. And we see containment. Containment itself has two forms, which I think we talked about. There is economic containment. Containment. Economic and military containment. Two ways that we have under Truman. The first one, I'm going to put TD, which represents what? The Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine is a policy that Truman, the Union, and money to countries to fight against communism spreading in those countries. Truman Doctrine money, there are two places which receive, Congress approves money to spend, and those are going to be Turkey. Do you remember the other one?
Greece.
Greece. I'm going to put G. Turkey and Greece. It's several $100 million to give them military aid and also economic aid in order to fight the spread of communism there. The big one, which is much bigger, I'm going to try and write it bigger, is going to be the Marshall Plan. The Marshall Plan is an expansion of the Truman Doctrine, developed by Secretary of State Marshall, John Marshall. George Marshall, I think is his name. John Marshall's the Chief Justice, George Marshall. Developed by Secretary of State George Marshall. It is 12.5 billion worth of economic aid to rebuild countries in Western Europe. And so we have the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. The next one is military, and this is going to be which war? Too vague. Korea, there you go. Korea. And this is the first time where the Cold War turns hot. Now, from the domestic standpoint, we didn't talk a lot about Truman and his domestic policies, but it's something that you should be familiar with. The one big domestic policy that's going on, and that let me rephrase that. Truman has a set of goals, legislative goals. It's his proposals that he talks about when he becomes president. It's called the Fair Deal. Did we mention this at all or no? Okay. Very rarely or briefly. The Fair Deal is a proposed expansion of New Deal programs. Remember, he took over for FDR, Truman did, and he's a Democrat. And he's in blue. I'm going to put the Republicans in blue and the Democrats Republicans in red and the Democrats in blue. The Fair Deal is a proposal to expand New Deal programs. It's unsuccessful. So he talks about expanding Social Security. By the way, we just talked about this today when that eventually is going to happen. He talks about universal health care. He's preaching for nationwide universal health care. Good thing that never became an issue in U.S. Increased employment benefits, things like that. But he doesn't hit the Congress that is there under Truman. Congress is going to be divided on these issues. He doesn't get it. One other thing that you should know, which deals with Korea, it becomes a domestic policy. It deals with the military. No. He desegregates the military. Desegregates or integrates the military.
Do we need to know, is that an executive order? Do we need to know the executive order?
No, not at all. No, not at all. Don't worry about it. So he desegregates or integrates the military, which is, Korea is the first war in which black and white soldiers are fighting side by side, not in segregated units. So that's all I want you to know for Truman right now. There are other things going on. The Red Scare has its peak in 1949 and 1950. That's another, I guess you could say, it's not necessarily a domestic policy, but a domestic issue. You could talk about the Red Scare, Joseph McCarthy, Senator Nixon. Richard Nixon is going to be very much so a red hunter. What?
Did you span this out over each presidency? So that was 1953.
Yeah, so this is all of President Truman. Truman goes from 45 to 53. That's why I did it like that. So 53, I'm going to put Eisenhower, and we'll go from there. So that goes through. Other things that are going to be issues during Truman's presidency would be expanding the size of the military. Expanding the size of the military. If you remember, we had that PowerPoint, which is up on Plus Portals. The National Security Act creates the National Security Council, plus the CIA, plus the Department of Defense. So we have new government agencies for regulating and containing that. What else is going on? The Berlin airlift crisis is going on under Truman. That's a foreign policy issue that you could talk about. Any others that I'm missing? I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but we'll go back and we'll take a look at the very end. Berlin Wall's later. That's not until under Kennedy. Yeah.
Soviets developing their own atomic bomb.
That's absolutely one. The Soviets developing their own atomic bomb in 1949. The U.S. developing its own hydrogen bomb. That happens in the early 1950s. I think that's pretty much all the things that you should know for Truman. Now, the next person elected is a Republican. It is Eisenhower. And he's elected in 1952 and office in his nickname is Ike. If you have a political cartoon, keep in mind Eisenhower's name is Ike. He is a Republican. He runs as a moderate conservative in Ike's presidency. Foreign policy will start there. Eisenhower's process, government spending less money, but he also wants to be harder on communism. Eisenhower, one of his campaign slogans is, Truman was too soft on communism. We need someone who will take a tougher stance on the Soviet Union and a tougher stance on communism. No more of this containing thing. We need to roll back the gains of communism. Does anyone remember his Secretary of State? Starts with a D. Dulles, yeah. Remember the nickname Dull, Duller, and Dulles? And so the question becomes, how do you spend less but also still get tougher on communism? And this policy, Eisenhower policy, becomes one that's known as massive retaliation. Massive retaliation. He builds up our nuclear arsenal. He also begins a program, it's called the Strategic Air Command. This is part of your textbook reading. The Strategic Air Command is a set of bombers. They are bombers that are equipped with nukes, and he reduces the size of the actual military, but the Strategic Air Command is going to be that massive retaliation, capable of inflicting massive damage. Think of it as like the SAC attack. Strategic Air Command. SAC. SAC attack. Don't forget it. Eisenhower.
Like, is that, did you just make that up?
I did just make that up.
So I don't like sack attack.
No, please don't. No. No, please don't. But if it helps you, Eisenhower implemented the SAC attack strategy. No, don't, please. Please don't, yeah. Huh? Do I have? Whoopsers. All right, so other things that are associated with Eisenhower's presidency, we forgot one. Communist China. China falls to communism under Truman as well. You remember that? It's a big one. That's 1940. Also during Eisenhower's presidency, foreign policy-wise, the French admit defeat in their quest to reconquer French Indochina. So 1955 would be, I'll put this as a third one, is the Geneva Conference is what splits French Indochina, FIC, into Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam, and further splits Vietnam into North and South Vietnam. Yep, this is under Eisenhower. It also represents the first time the United States begins sending money and advisors to Vietnam, supporting the Diem regime in South Vietnam, all under Eisenhower. During the 1950s, domestically, as far as domestic policies, it's the Strategic Air Command, and it was a group. It's essentially a fleet of nuclear bombers. Yeah, planes that can drop nuclear bombs and inflict massive damage. Yeah. Yes. So the Geneva Conference splits up French Indochina. French Indochina. Indochina is one word, actually. French Indochina, which was a former colony of France's. They try and reclaim it after World War I. They invade. They get beaten. The last epic battle is the Battle of Dien Bien Phu. They agree to negotiate peace terms with former colonies known as French Indochina. And at this conference, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam are created. Laos is Laos. Cambodia is just like it sounds, Cambodia. And Vietnam is further split into North and South Vietnam. You're welcome. Now, domestically, what's going on inside? Yeah.
He comes up with dynamic conservatism.
That's one. His domestic platform, his domestic proposals fall into this catchy title known as dynamic. Is that what you just said?
I said dynamic.
Okay, I just messed it up. Dynamic conservatism. Now, the key word here isn't dynamic. The key word is conservatism. He's a moderate conservative. There are several things that are associated with when it comes to people in general, be liberal. Eisenhower doesn't do anything. For as well-liked as he is, he doesn't hardly do anything in regards to the civil rights movement. He doesn't do anything to really significantly help African Americans, with one exception in one instance of one state in which he stands up to one governor, and that's involving what? The Little Rock Nine. That's Orville Faubus as the governor of Arkansas. The Little Rock Nine, those 9 African-American children enroll at Little Rock Central High, and Eisenhower sends in the 101st Airborne Division to ensure they can go to this school after the governor refuses to allow them. However, there are some other things that you should know about Eisenhower. This is when Congress passes the National Highways Act. Eisenhower does a good job of spending less money overall. In fact, he balances the budget, I think 3 of his 8 years, something like that. So he does a good job of not increasing the debt that the federal government has. The National Highways Act. The big thing, too, another big one, is the beginning of an economic boom that lasts from 1950 until basically 1970, all throughout the 50s and 60s. By the tail end of the 1960s, we start seeing the economy falter, largely because of the spending we're doing on Johnson's Great Society programs and the Vietnam War. Johnson promises something that is almost impossible to make good on. It's known as the guns and butter philosophy. We can fight wars and provide much-needed reforms and lots of spending to our citizens at home. The truth of the matter is, it is really hard to fight a full-scale war like Vietnam was and spend as much money as Johnson proposed on things like federal aid to education, Medicare, Medicaid, increased Social Security benefits. That's really hard to do. And by the way, President Obama, during his first term as president, was dealing with some of the same things. He was promising new reforms, and that's something that he had to get through his first term as president. So, any questions on this stuff? Consumer culture of the 1950s. Make sure you know about this consumer culture. You have the rise of the suburbs going on. You have chain food restaurants opening up. The first kind of primitive credit cards. Television makes a huge impact in the 1950s. New electric dish washers in every home. This is all part of the 1950s. Conservatism. Leave It to Beaver, I Love Lucy are the TV shows that are very popular. That kind of stuff. Make sure you take a look. Elvis Presley hits the scene. Elvis. Did we play some Elvis in here? I think we did. Yeah. All right. Anything else that we would like to discuss in here? I don't think so. 1961, JFK. Yeah.
How was the women's role switched from like right after the war?
Good question. Following World War II, women worked more outside the home than they had before World War II. There is some truth to the fact that men come home and take some of the jobs that women were holding previously. But as a general trend throughout the 50s and throughout the 60s, women are working in increasingly higher numbers. It's not like every woman is working, but many are still working outside the home. However, what we see is throughout the 50s, women are expected to take jobs that are either female-dominated jobs, secretaries, things like that, teachers, assistants in different business practices. Nurses is a big industry and profession for females. Women are also predominantly seen as the caretakers of the home. So yes, there are more women working. There are more women going to schools during the 50s and 60s, but they are not breaking that stereotype or breaking through that stereotype of what we call the cult of domesticity, which is the domestic sphere is the primary place for women. Does that make sense? So the 50s and 60s see some mild gains for women in the workplace. However, the traditional gender roles are still alive and well, is how I would say it if I was writing about it in an essay. Betty Friedan is going to write her novel, The Feminine Mystique, in the 1960s, and the feminist movement really isn't until the 1970s. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Okay? So, JFK, foreign policy. Foreign policy. Well, as opposed to, we'll do them in order. The Banks invasion. Who's this an assassination attempt on? Castro. This deals with Cuba. Castro. Kennedy did not plan this overthrow himself. This was something done by the CIA in Eisenhower years. Kennedy just kind of inherited it. 2, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Which Soviet Union, USSR, good. Cuba and the Soviet Union, yes. Pointed at them? Absolutely, yes. Is it hypocritical of us? Absolutely. Did the public know that we had nukes pointed at the Soviet Union? No, not at all. So publicly? No. No, we didn't. But did we? Yes. 3. Berlin Wall. And 4, which becomes an increasingly bigger one, is Vietnam. In fact, by the end of 1963, we have about 15,000 military advisors in Vietnam. The first deaths, military deaths of U.S. soldiers and first casualties happen under the Kennedy administration, to my knowledge. So we see a Vietnam conflict that is growing. from the domestic policy standpoint. His domestic platform is called New Frontier. And we talked about this today in class about what it consisted of. Here are things that the New Frontier looked for. Civil rights legislation, didn't get it. He championed civil rights legislation, no go. Extended Social Security benefits, he did get that. Food stamps, he did get food stamps. The Congress passed a law creating food stamps. Increased minimum wage, I told you guys today in class. Did I tell you how much he increased the minimum wage to? $1.25. That is a whole hour for a McDouble. It's what a deal.
No, the double's like $1.50 now.
Is it really?
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's crazy. Oh, by the way, one thing I almost forgot. In Vietnam, Kennedy took a new approach. He in this idea of massive retaliation. What's in Vietnam? Flexible response. Good. Flexible response, meaning he has an array of options so that he can send military advisors. This is the creation of Green Beret.
Was that the complete opposite of massive retaliation?
Yeah, absolutely. That's all or nothing. This is like, well, I can do what I see fit.
Is it also more expensive?
It is slightly more expensive. It is that it creates involved militarily, right? If it's all or nothing, you might think twice about going all or nothing. If it's, flexible, you might be more likely to get involved. What was it going to say? Vietnam conflict, flexible response. Oh, I had something. I lost it. Vietnam, flexible response. I can't remember. I lost it. I'm sorry. I'll come back to it if it hits me. Space race. He does launch NASA. NASA is created under Kennedy, but it's not going to be till '69 that we get a man on the moon. I think that's it. The one other thing that I would say about JFK, and I told this to fifth hour, but I don't think I said it to fourth hour today. Sometimes you will see the word Camelot associated with JFK. It's in your textbook, Camelot. Yeah, they'll call the Kennedy administration Camelot. It comes from Knights of the Round Table. Kennedy assembled one of the youngest, most energetic administrations and cabinets that had ever been seen up to that time, including his younger brother, Bobby Kennedy, as Attorney General, Secretary of War, Robert McNamara. Oh, yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
Oh, no, you can't read that.
No.
You can't read that.
Oh, jeez. Kind of like trying to watch a reading without glasses.
How about this? Thank you for pointing that out.
After you do everything.
That's okay. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to correct my mistake by doing the only thing that seems logical to do.
You erase it all and do it again.
No, I'm drawing a big D around it. Democrat. You think that'll solve the issue? D for Democrat.
Or maybe we'll confuse people like he was like Democrat.
He's a Democrat, I promise.
Like Republican.
No, he was really a Democrat, I promise. He's about as Democrat as they come. There was once a DBQ on this whole Camelot thing, and people freaked out because they didn't know what Camelot stood for. So just know it represents the White House, and Kennedy's called it. He was yeah.
So could you see that in a document then that they would be referring it to Camelot, or was it more of like just a public name for it?
It was a public name for it. Yeah. Okay, so then LBJ and Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1963. LBJ. And let's talk about things associated with LBJ. Foreign policy-wise. The big one, Vietnam. The escalation of the war in Vietnam. Vietnam escalation. Big time, yeah.
So they just want to associate the new frontier for JFK's.
Yep. His domestic policy desires. It's his legislative agenda. It's liberal. He wants to spend more money with the federal government. He wants Congress to pass Social Security benefits and extend them, that kind of thing. The escalation in Vietnam is the big one for LBJ. I feel like I'm forgetting something with Kennedy. It'll come to me in a minute. Also, another word that you should know is increasingly unpopularity.
Was it Kennedy or LBJ who did the education?
It's LBJ. I'm going to talk about it in a second. It's unpopular. It's becoming increasingly unpopular. Yeah, Luke. That was 1968. So that's going to be under LBJ as well. So this is the Tet Offensive. The Gulf of Tonkin Resolution is in 1964, which the Gulf of Tonkin incident was when our ships were supposedly attacked in the Gulf of Tonkin. The administration, the Johnson administration, goes to Congress and asks for a resolution giving him more power. They pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, giving him basically a blank check for the Vietnam War, and he increases our role here. Now, domestic policy. This is really important, and we talked about it today. If you weren't here today, watch the video, but you're going to get a crash course of it here. Domestic policy, his domestic reforms are called the Great Society. This is going to be a smashing success for him, I guess you could say, depending on if you supported him or not, or if you were on board with his proposals or not. But more legislation is going to be passed during Johnson years as president than any other president in between FDR and him. So, I mean, there's a lot Congress does in the years 1963 to 1969. And so here are some things that are involved with the Great Society. One is civil rights legislation, such as the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the 24th Amendment. The 24th Amendment bans poll taxes. So you have three major pieces of legislation in regards to. Another thing is money. I think I told fourth hour. This is the time period where a lot of parochial schools actually began to flourish because the government began giving money to students, not the schools themselves. And so students could take that money and go to parochial schools, although nowadays it's to school districts and schools themselves as opposed to. That's why you don't get any help to go to a school like Divine Child. There was a big push a number of years back, in which they were trying to get a voucher system in which each of your parents would have gotten a check from the state, and then you could take that check and go anywhere you so pleased. The question becomes the separation of church and state. Should the government be giving money, even if it's indirectly giving money, to a Catholic school or other religiously affiliated schools? Medicare and Medicaid, big time. Accomplishments for LBJ and Congress. Medicare, Medicaid. And lastly, but not leastly, reform of quota system for immigrants, which had been around since the 1920s. That's LBJ in a nutshell. Yeah, probably. That's probably what I wanted to talk about is New Frontier, plus it's the start of the civil rights movement. Although it happens, we should probably put this too. And Korea, beginning of economic boom. 4 would be start of civil rights movement. 1950s, mid-1950s. And then in 1969. The election of 1968 is Richard Nixon against Barry Goldwater. Richard Nixon wins. And we're going to pick up here tomorrow. So we'll pick up foreign policy with Nixon tomorrow. The one big thing is domestic foreign policy now, because this is something we've talked about, but we're going to save domestic policies and pick up that tomorrow so I can get you out of here. Foreign policy is the Vietnamization of the war. It is his plan to withdraw U.S. troops. So by the time Vietnam is escalating, I'm talking 500,000 troops by 1969. 500,000 U.S. troops in Vietnam. Nixon's going to draw it down to about 30,000 troops within the next 3 years. During Nixon's time period, you have the fall of Saigon. Actually, that's 75, and that would have been Gerald Ford because Nixon's too busy caught up in a scandal known as Watergate, so we won't put that there for him. Sorry. The Watergate scandal, we'll talk about it tomorrow. It's not necessarily a policy of his. His policy isn't scandal. I'm running on the scandal platform. Change and spying, yeah.
You said that we're picking up tomorrow, but that is a review session tomorrow.
No, in class tomorrow. In class tomorrow, we're doing Nixon, domestic policies. We're going to go into Gerald R. Ford. Gerald R. Ford, he's the only president from Michigan. He was never elected as vice president. He was never elected as president. He once fell down the steps of Air Force One.
Worst president ever.
He also pardoned Nixon.
Worst president.
I wouldn't call him the worst ever. Just maybe not the lacks some social intelligence, huh?
Also just happened to be president.
He kind of got the reputation of being a big oof.
So he's like the Detroit of the president. Like he had like this one moment and then over and over.
Sort of. I wouldn't say that. That's too harsh. He almost won the election of 1976, which is amazing considering how unpopular he was. All right, we'll stop there. I hopefully you found this useful. 37 minutes.